Welcome in, everyone. Welcome to State of the Family Courts. My name is Mark Reel, and tonight we have another return guest, one of our more popular episodes that we have ever done. So we have from the state of Washington, we have Attorney Sean Kuhlmeyer, who by trade in his day-to-day, up until recently, is a personal injury attorney in Washington, but he's someone who has personally experienced the family court system in the state of Washington and has recently dipped his toes into representing individuals in family court. So, Sean, thank you so much for coming back on. How are we doing tonight?
Every day above ground is a good day.
Yeah,
Right?
definitely. Yeah, I cannot argue with that. I cannot argue with that. So, first thing I want to tell everyone is that obviously watch the show here live tonight, but go back. It was about 2 months ago Sean was on. You can find that on the Father's Rights Movement's YouTube page. Go back and watch. Sean and I spent about an hour and 45 minutes talking about a wide range of topics, but a lot about attorney ethics. And one of the things that your kind of first professional move into the family law space was the website you're putting together, unethicalkarma.com. So that's also something that everyone should go check out. And Sean, you want to tell everybody a little bit about what the purpose of that website and what you're building there is?
So, well, I guess it's time to sort of just go ahead and reveal that. Opposing counsel in my divorce case, her name is Karma. So literally, her first name is Karma. And so the name of the website, it isn't directly named after her, but it's got some poetic license there because she really taught me through fire how unethical and corrupt the family court system is, and in that process, I just learned a lot. And one of the things that I had to do was I had to learn how do you successfully get the Bar Association to pay attention to the ethical misconduct of family law attorneys by actually investigating them when you file a bar complaint against them. So part of what my goal was in building Unethical Karma was to get my
I think we may have lost Sean there.
ethical
Oh, there he's back.
minefield, and also be able to file and write bar complaints against unethical opposing attorneys that actually get results. So those are my goals with unethicalkarma.com. Across the country. I think it would be a wonderful thing over the next, say, 5 years or so, if bar associations across the country suddenly got attorneys because they're getting complaints that they simply can't ignore. So I think that would have real ripple effects, and it would be an important piece of sort of the shared parenting puzzle because whether attorneys like to admit it or not, um, the unethical, high conflict creating attorneys are a significant piece of the problem. And not to put too fine a spin on it, they're causing people to die. So I mean, several fathers today will kill themselves because of access to their children issues. Children become suicidal because of high conflict divorces, and at least a significant portion of the high conflict divorces that you see are fueled by the actions of attorneys.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I mean, I think that it's one thing as a party in a family law case. I know personally, day in day out, being kind of in the underbelly of the beast. I a lot of times tell people it is a lot worse on the inside than anyone could even imagine, and we hear day in day out about the awful, horrible stories that occur in every city, every state, across this country.
Yeah, I
So
mean, think of it this way: every major city in the United States, and what are there? There's something like 60 really major cities in the United States, or something like that. I mean, it's a relatively large number. In every single one of those cities, there is a handful. And a handful can, of course, vary from it's one or two, right, to in a really big city like New York or LA, maybe it's scores. Okay, of these just absolute douchebag, unethical attorneys that will come along and they will just take a case where the issues are pretty simple and pretty clear, and they'll turn it into a high conflict, mess that is effectively a license for them to print money. And when it's all over, the family will be devastated, and they'll everyone will be broke. The children will often say, as they reach adulthood, they often say, I paid for my parents' divorce because my parents now can't afford to do any of the things that parents normally do for their children as they fly the nest, like pay for college or maybe help them with a down payment, or even do things as innocuous as maybe as be able to purchase an automobile for them, right? I mean, everything winds up getting sucked out of the family by what are effectively predatory, rapacious, vulture attorneys, and what they're doing at the very beginning is unethical. I mean, like I said last time, every single case has three issues, right? It's got a parenting plan in the best interest of the child, equitable distribution of the marital assets, and if there are credible issues of abuse or domestic violence, resolving those. And what they really should do is they should resolve those as cheaply and easily and as fastly as possible, that leave the parents able to still communicate with each other, because over time we know that over time a lot of these issues, a lot of the invective tamps down over time, especially if there's reasonable communication between them. But instead they come along and they cut communication off. Right now all communication runs to the attorneys, right? The attorneys are then able to manipulate the situation, manipulate what their client knows by just piecing out what it is that they tell them, or spinning what it is that they tell them. So and in the end, families are devastated. You know, mothers and fathers and children, they're all devastated. Um, and the only people that are doing well are the circle of vultures, the attorneys, the GALs, the shrinks that are doing psyche evals, all of that crap, all of those people. Those are the people who are doing well, and the people who are actually in the family are just devastated.
I want to come back along to the attorneys and then the third parties, but we have a question that's super relevant, and we covered this in the first show, but I think it's something that is worth covering again. So Josh writes here, have you ever heard of trying to get an attorney investigated through a bar of ethics or whatever it's called? And I'll kind of stop there because he kind of winds around.
Wait, put that back up so I can read it.
Okay.
Criminal defense of the child's mother had an order that's been falsified against the father. Have you heard of them just blatantly ignoring the complaint against the attorney? No.
So
I don't really completely understand that question, but no.
I want to tie it back into something very specific though, and that is bar complaints. And family law attorneys in general are some of the most complained about attorneys. It's I think it's number 2, I don't know.
One.
It's probably number 1.
I think family law attorneys and criminal defense attorneys sort of trade places, but I think it's consistently recently been family law attorneys. It's interesting because a very good friend of mine is a lawyer's malpractice insurance broker. So she spent a decade writing lawyers' malpractice policies for lawyers. So I've read all of these insurance industry insider documents about what you look for when you're insuring an attorney. But anyway, so go ahead.
So when there's a bar complaint, and it's you're trying to get something remedied, you're trying to get something investigated. The number one thing is the attorney has to have actually violated an ethical rule. You being unhappy or you not liking the outcome is not enough to trigger an investigation. That's a situation where they may call the attorney up and say, "Hey, what happened?" And it'd be, "Hey, I fired the client because they weren't paying and they violated our agreement," and they'll close the file. So if you're having issues with an attorney, what are some things that how do you want to structure, or what do you want to do to end up with a bar complaint that is actually taken seriously?
Okay, so the first thing that you have to do is that you have to understand thoroughly the rules. Here's my copy, okay? And it's beat up. And without understanding the rules, you can the rules are somewhat intuitive. They're really intuitive. So a person who feels like they're seeing that opposing counsel is doing stuff that feels wrong, that's probably a sort of a good gut level indicator that you're probably right. They probably are doing something that's wrong. Okay. And in my case, the very first indicator that I got about it was when opposing counsel was saying XYZ happened when I knew for a fact XYZ never happened. So that meant she either was flat out lying, which I don't doubt. She's a lying sack of shit. Okay. That's what she does. I know that now, but at the time I didn't. Okay. So she was either flat out lying, or B, she hadn't investigated, okay, adequately. Because if she had investigated adequately, she would have been able to determine fairly quickly and fairly easily that what she then later said, which wasn't true, actually wasn't true. So one of those two things, she knew she was lying up front and she was just flat out lying because it was advancing her case. And there's a lot of that. Or B, she just didn't investigate. But both of those things are unethical. Both of those things are unethical. So, it can feel wrong, right? You just feel like that's wrong. Well, then the first thing that you want to do is you want to go to unethicalkarma.com, right? And you want to look at the page that has every single jurisdiction in the United States, including DC and Guam and whatever else. And you want to go and you want to download the rules of professional conduct for that state, and you want to read them. You want to read them 2 or 3 times, and you want to print them out, not just have them on your computer. You want to print them out so that they're on your desk and that you can read them and you understand them, so that when you are ultimately writing a bar complaint, what you are doing is you're saying, Sean violated ethical rule 123 when he did XYZ on this date. Okay? And here's the evidence of what it is that he did on that date. All right? Therefore, he violated the ethical rule. It needs to be that clear. The one that we see a lot, or that I saw a lot, and I'm still seeing a lot of in family law, is lying to the court. Lying to the court, not adequately investigating claims. I guarantee you, every single bar, every single jurisdiction, their rules of professional conduct have a rule that basically says that all issues have to be well grounded in fact and law. So it's the ethical rule equivalent of the civil procedure rule that requires that everything is well grounded in fact and law. And now that I'm, of course, under pressure and got a camera in front of my face, it's slipping my mind what one it is, right? Because I'd love to be able to just read from it. That's the one that requires, that's an ethical duty for an attorney to adequately investigate. RPC 3.3, which is candor towards the tribunal, it says very, very clearly. I mean, it doesn't get much more explicit than that. It's clearer than, say, the Second Amendment is. Right? Okay. A lawyer shall not knowingly make a false statement of fact or law to a tribunal, or fail to correct a false statement of material fact or law previously made to a tribunal by the lawyer. That's pretty damn clear. And you know what it doesn't say? It doesn't say a lawyer shall not, except for family law lawyers.
So I think the big takeaway there is understanding that just being unhappy or not liking something isn't enough. What ethical rule did they violate?
You have to know that very clearly. In law school, we go to law school and, we learn, all right, all of us learn this very formulaic way of legal writing, all right? You'll remember this: issue, rule, application, conclusion, right? Every single piece of legal writing, from a Supreme Court case to a motion in a trial court, follows that format. What is the issue? What is the rule? How are the facts applied to the rule? All right. And what is the outcome? As it relates to a bar complaint, it's the exact same form of legal writing. All right. And what it is lawyer Smith violated ethical rule 3.3 when lawyer Smith lied to the court saying that Sean was at his ex-wife's place of work trying to talk to his ex-wife, when in reality Sean was sitting in his office 5 miles away talking to his office building manager. So that's the statement. Lawyer Smith knows that they violated the ethical rule because Sean served on lawyer Smith on a day before lawyer Smith made their statement to the court the following documents that prove that Sean was not downtown Seattle, was instead in his office. Despite knowing that these facts, lawyer Smith then told the judge in the motion on this date that Sean was downtown Seattle, when in reality he was in his office. See the court's official transcript. It needs to be that explicit. And here's why. So the standard of discipline in lawyer professional discipline, okay, is, and I'm reading right now from a Washington State Supreme Court decision. All right, the standard of acts of misconduct in bar discipline cases must be established by disciplinary counsel, that means the Bar Association, by a clear preponderance of the evidence. This standard of proof is somewhat lower than the beyond reasonable doubt standard required in criminal prosecutions. So it's a little bit lower than beyond a reasonable doubt standard. All right. And there's another case. All right. A clear preponderance of the evidence is an intermediate standard between simple preponderance in a civil suit and reasonable doubt in a criminal action. So that means that you've got to give the Bar Association clear evidence, right, of misconduct. Or at the very least, you have to give them enough evidence to show that there's a very serious problem that they then investigate, because they then may find additional evidence themselves.
I think that's a big point.
Yeah, and
you have to give them evidence. You have to give them something to say, we're going to expend resources to look into this matter. You can't expect them to do all the work.
Right. It can't just be, I know because I feel it in my gut that, Lawyer Smith lied, right? When he said that I was a domestic violence abuser, because it never happened, right? The thing that the unethical attorneys who create these conflicts hide behind is that they are allowed to believe their client. So they're allowed to presume their client is telling them the truth. Well, the problem for that becomes is that that's true, but it's only true to a certain extent, because the ethical rule that requires that they conduct a reasonable investigation, right? Once they've got constructive knowledge, once they've got pretty good information that their client is lying to them, their ethical responsibility is in order to investigate what the truth of what their client's saying goes up, right? But they all just conveniently ignore that. They're like, well, that's just not what we're going to pay attention to, because if they did that, then they would very quickly find themselves in a situation where they'd have to talk to their clients and say, look, I'm not going to lie for you. And, you're saying things that are false, that are provably false. And I'm not going to lie for you, because if I lie for you, right, I could be disbarred because of that. And so that means that, you're either going to have to fall on the sword and authorize me to go forward and correct that, right? Whatever false statement that I just put before the court, you're going to have to authorize me to correct that, or I'm going to have to withdraw from your case, because I can't be a part of that. But they don't do that, right? Because that doesn't continue to generate $425 an hour. And they also know, many of them also know, and for instance, opposing counsel in my case knows very, very clearly that is that when my ex-wife goes and consults with another attorney, a capable, knowledgeable, ethical family law attorney, they're going to say to my ex-wife, your attorney fucked your case up really badly and put you in a place that's just, really, really bad. And you've got these, huge problems now because of the way your attorney managed your case. And I know that not just because of my experience in this case with opposing counsel, but I know that because I've also read that in, the docket filings of other attorneys, and I've spoken with other attorneys who've got experience with this particular bad apple. And they've come back and said, this is what happened.
Yeah, I think that brings up a couple really, really good points. I mean, I think your point about individuals going to another attorney and their attorney leveraging that into business for themselves, I found that, I'll be honest, I fired more clients than have fired me. But every single client that has fired me, it has been around them demanding I do something that I just say, I can't do that because it's either not true, we're stepping into an ethical gray area, and a couple days later I get a fax, I get an email, I get a packet in the mail with a substitution of attorney form on it. And so it ends up being, I think, this catch-22 for an attorney, especially maybe an attorney who is struggling to get by financially, which I know for a lot of our viewers is sacrilegious to say, but there are a lot of attorneys, especially in family law, that do just enough to get by. And so the question becomes for them, do I step into this ethical gray area and make a little bit more money, or do I run the risk of them running to my competitor down the street and them saying, oh, he messed up or she messed up, come work with me, we'll fix it. And then obviously there are the attorneys who are part of massive money-making firms, and they'll do anything for that, like you said, that $425 an hour.
Yeah, and it's it's appalling, isn't it? I mean, it really is. I mean, you're like, the ethical rules are supposed to mean something, and they're supposed to mean that there's a level playing field. And look, to all the viewers out there, I've got sort of a message for you, right? Attorneys often don't earn anywhere near as much as the public believes they do. And there's an enormous amount of personal risk to being an attorney. And it's very expensive to be an attorney. Just my licensing fees alone are about $500 a year. That's just for my professional license. Malpractice policy on top of that, office rent, all the things associated with running a business, right? And then on top of that, you've got these ethical rules that are there, which if you screw them up, you could lose your license. Rudy Giuliani's going to lose his license, right? He's already been suspended from the practice of law, right? Because he made false statements to the public, right? The the attorney in California that I talked about last time, Giraldi, I said it right this time, right? He's got major problems because he's got so many bar complaints, mounted against him. So it's difficult to be an attorney, and it's expensive to be an attorney, and the risks are really, really high, and the rewards can be really wonderful, but the rewards can also be a pittance for things. I've worked on cases. One of my very first cases, by the time I calculated out how much time I'd put into it and how much money I actually got out of it, I was working for less than minimum wage. I think I ultimately was working for about $3.50 an hour. Okay, that's beginning of my career. All right, but it's a lesson learned. But lots of attorneys don't earn as much as people think they do, and so that provides a real incentive for them to want to get into this situation. And unfortunately, in family law, the stakes are literally your relationship with your children for the rest of your life. And there is nothing that people won't spend money on. They'll spend every penny they have, and then more than that, right? Because it's about their relationship with the next generation. It's about their entire identity. And these unethical attorneys who capitalize on that, and then the other circling crowd of buzzards and vultures that want to make money off of that. They all know that people will spend anything on it. And here's the dirty secret. Here is the absolute dirty secret, and this is empirically backed up by research. Okay? The reality is that the overwhelming majority of all of these high conflict cases that happen, all of them, what the people really need is they need help learning how to communicate with each other more effectively. That's what they need, so that they can solve their problems cooperatively, instead of being forced through a system that's going to pit them at each other, force them to reveal every dirty little secret that they know about this person that they shared a portion of their life with, right? And try and turn it against them, right? Instead of doing that, what you ultimately need is one to be able to say, look, everyone's got baggage, everyone's got a skeleton in the closet, nobody's perfect. What we need to be able to do is focus on how do we communicate with each other so that we can solve issues amongst our family cooperatively in our children's best interest. That's the dirty little secret. And even in domestic violence issues, but that just runs counter to the thought process in the United States. But that thought process is driven by a $60 billion a year industry of people who are profiting off of it.
I mean, I think in the words we hear in criminal court, innocent until proven guilty. I think a lot of times that it specifically men end up on the receiving end where they must prove their fitness. And if we adjusted the system to where there was a strong presumption, and it's true, 99.9% of parents are fit and able that enter this system and end up in these prolonged fights. Typically, both parents are fit parents.
Right.
And if we we remove the tit for tat and best interest, where you got to attack that he got a DUI 16 years ago, or you got to say, well, he yelled at the kids one time, or she got really drunk one night and passed out. Like, if you remove these tit for tat things, then you can resolve these cases. I always tell clients, the quicker we get to a resolution, the easier this is going to be. Because the longer it gets drug out, the more mud that's going to be thrown, and the more difficult your co-parenting relationship's going to be. On top of the prospect that at any moment, the judge could take a certain set of allegations and, I guess in criminal terms, throw the book at you and force you into the system where you have to pay for professionally supervised visits, you have to pay for evaluators, you have to pay for classes, therapists, all these different things, all these other individuals who, quite frankly, are leeches on the system, just in order for you to have a relationship with your child or children.
Right, with your own child. Right. So I think we touched on this really briefly in the last time I was here, but my residential time with my son was suspended because I got a speeding ticket, which was ultimately dismissed for lack of evidence. I'm now convinced that the arbitrator who decided that in our case is corrupt. I don't think it's the type of corruption where she was paid off, but I think it's the type of corruption where opposing counsel brings cases to her on a regular basis. So, and the reason she does that is because she gets favorable results from this particular arbitrator. I believe that the GAL in my case was corrupt. She also has a long history of working very closely with opposing counsel as well, and they have what appears on all levels to be a close relationship. All right, so before magically my residential time was suspended because I got a speeding ticket, which was dismissed for lack of evidence. So legally, that means nothing, right? Okay. So before that happened, magically, somehow, my ex-wife thought that I was a good father. Right? She thought that I, had a loving and rich relationship with our son, right? We never had any sorts of, issues. We had a bizarro incident where my son got separated from me in a public place, and I panicked, and people misunderstood what happened, and they called the cops, and the cops notified CPS. CPS investigated, and they issued an unfounded report. So,
I mean, let's pull it back. Let's pull it back. The relationship between attorneys and these third-party individuals. There are therapists, there are psychologists, there are doctors, the individuals who, like California, the professional supervising standards are a joke. But these individuals, so what happens? And this is an issue when you're pro se versus, say, the other party is represented. Okay, well, this therapist who's going to do reunification therapy. So they know once they get you in through the door, you have no recourse. What are you going to do? You're going to stop visitation. You're going to file something with the court. It's going to take 3 months. You're not going to get to see your kids. And then the judge could say, you're the problem, not them. So they know once they get that business, they have it. So if they build good rapport and they do positive things for attorneys, those attorneys are going to want to keep bringing them business, and that business is stuck with them once you have a court order saying this person's the therapist, this person's doing the evaluation. Now they have a license to do whatever they want. You're not a willing customer. If they have bad business practices, I'll give a very specific example. Therapist screws up and fails to communicate with the father-client. And the father-client shows up for his visit and then messages saying, "Hey, I'm here. I'm ready. I'm here for my visit." It was like I think it was like 15 minutes early, and then about 10 minutes later, the therapist calls him and says, "Oh no, I thought I had reached out to you. We're doing it virtually this week, and it started 45 minutes ago. So you have like 15 minutes left." And so, yeah. And so the dad says, "Okay, well, I got to drive somewhere to get service, to get on Zoom. And then, like, I assume my fee I paid is just going to cover next week." And her response was, "No, I've been with the kids for 45 minutes. All the fault was hers." You think about any business. If they did that to a consumer, that consumer would no longer utilize their services. But this individual knows there is zero recourse for her actions.
Right.
And I sent an email to her on behalf of my client, and I said, "This is just bad business. You screwed up, and you're refusing to do anything to remedy that." And eventually, I said, like, just out of principle, on my own dime, I'm going to drag you to court. I'm going to make you miss a half day of your appointments that you gouge people for that are court ordered, to make you sit in a courtroom to answer for what you did. The judge isn't going to make you do anything, but you're going to miss a half day. And finally, she waived the fee for that session. But there's zero accountability to these individuals, and they have they have reason to be very good to as many attorneys as possible. Because I know in my area, there's evaluations, there's like 10 to 12 individuals who do them. So if you get in good with as many attorneys as possible, like, they're going to funnel more business your way, and it's $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 in your pocket. If you're a therapist and you can get people, if you have the more attorneys you have say, "Hey, pick this person, go to this person," that's just filling your calendar. Right. And those clients can't leave once they come in by the nature of the system.
Right. You, let me come right back to that, because let me finish your fitness thing. Right. So, because it segues right back to what you're saying. So, the fitness thing, right? You got parents that are normal, right? It's normal to, have some bizarro situation happen in your family that just goes, strange, like what happened with me, that ultimately, comes back and says there's nothing here. And then you wind up in this create conflict, create problems environment, right? And you instantly go from being a fit parent, in which your ex-wife thinks that you're a great guy, you're reading bedtime stories to your kid, right? You and him are dressing up like Darth Vader to go on a summer parade together, right? You're a good father, right? Because her attorney is manipulating her, saying you want this, or you want that, or you want more money, or she wants more power or control or whatever. Suddenly you're not fit, and suddenly you need to be supervised, you need to be watched, right? When you're having an interaction with your child. And then those professionals, that relationship between the professionals. So let me give you some good examples that came right from what you said. The arbitrator in our case, so me and my ex-wife, we went through arbitration. And again, I think I said this last time. Anybody listen to this? If arbitration comes up, no arbitrator. No. Going to arbitration was one of the worst decisions of my life. Go to trial instead. Okay, because with arbitration, you get hardly any review. Okay, at least with a trial, you're going to be reviewed by a court of appeals. Okay, The arbitrator in our case made $29,000 from deciding the issues in our divorce. $29,000. And then when she wrote her arbitration decision, which was a steaming pile of shit. Yeah. So just a steaming pile of shit. What it really did is it laid the groundwork to create future conflict between my ex-wife and I that would ensure that we had to go back to arbitration again and spend more money, in arbitration again. So, and, not surprisingly, like 24 months, after the initial arbitration decision, we were back there again. That was another $5,000, right? So, now she's got, $34,000 of what used to be our retirement money, right? And then she wanted another $1,800 to decide an issue that she should have decided, that would be included in the $5,000 that we had just previously paid. So you're absolutely right that, this cottage industry of professionals, right? They all work together and they've got, so in the arbitrator's case, she had 34,000 reasons to give opposing counsel a favorable decision. Now, here's where it gets really dark. Now, here's where it's really, really dark. When you get an unethical opposing attorney like I've had, one of the things they do is they develop a reputation to be just impossible to work with, just a raging, fill in your inappropriate profanity gender label title here. Okay? That no opposing counsel really wants to deal with them. They don't want to work with them, right? And for the third parties who provide services for them, what will happen, and she did this and she's done this in multiple cases, is that when a third-party service provider starts to stand up to her and say, no, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not going to issue a supervision report that said there was anything wrong, anything inappropriate that happened between the father and the child. No bizarro questionings, no things that were trying to pry for information. I'm not going to write that report. No, I'm not going to write a case management report that says that, the father's got all the problems and that mother's actions are justified, right? No, I'm not going to write, a domestic violence intervention training report that says that the father is not making progress in domestic violence intervention training. And so what these unethical attorneys will do, and this is and happened in my case, is they then go after those third party providers. They threaten them with subpoenas, that they're going to subpoena them and take their testimony to pressure them. They file professional grievances against them with their licensing agencies, so they get put through the ringer, right? And because they're taking a client that is the opposing party to her, they will try and destroy their professional reputation amongst the cottage industry of professionals, so they won't get any other work, right? Because they're coming along and saying, no, what you're doing is wrong and your client has a problem.
And they run up the bill. And then they walk into court and they say, my client can't pay, so you need to make him pay for all of this time I spent, all these things I made this third-party professional jump through and run up the bill. Now he needs to be the one that pays for it because my client can't pay.
Yeah. Or what they'll do is even more insidious than that is they do what Hitler's minister of propaganda, Goebbels, said, which is tell the big lie, make it big, keep telling it, and the people will eventually believe it. And that's what they do. They walk into court and they say it's all his fault, right? Blame, all his fault. Dad. They just keep saying it. Right? And they get courts to believe it. Now there's a very particular reason why they do that. I mean, I researched the crap out of that. And they do that because there's a psychological manipulation tactic. It's the same thing. It's what Goebbels knew about, right? It's what a lot of people have known about intuitively, but it's now been studied empirically, which is called the illusory truth effect. and you see this in family law all the time, which is you just keep repeating a lie, and you repeat it over and over and over again. And repetition of the idea overcomes a human brain's natural skepticism to something, and they ultimately makes this lie more acceptable as a truth when it's not actually a truth. So there's empirical research behind why they do this, but that's yeah.
Well, they do it against truth too. They do it against truthful statements. So one of the things in family law, like you want to build, like you don't have a ton of time in front of the judge during the process, so you build themes. And an individual, I don't like individuals I have no respect for. I don't like saying their name. So I call this individual amongst a group Peter, because he looks like Peter Griffin. So one of Peter's tricks is that you'll start to build a theme, and it'll show like, hey, his client is being disagreeable. His client is trying to drag things out. And he'll make a big hubbub. They always say this. They always do these things. This is just the story that he's making up. So when confronted with truth, then they go straight to that of like, oh, here they go again. They always say this. This is just their excuse. Or they'll go with a thing out here in California, another weekly mention. We have really bad domestic violence law, Family Code Section 3044. Weekly mention on the show. But you'll see these like mean text domestic violence restraining orders. No allegations of physical violence, no nothing. And all of a sudden, an attorney will, hey, there are serious domestic violence issues in this. They're
really serious.
Yeah, they'll say it over and over again, and I had a couple weeks ago, and the DV stuff was before I had come on the case, but it's literally just back and forth text messages. And he happened to be the one who had the DVRO granted against him. And I just turned to him, and it was actually in a courtroom where there's a pillar between the counsel's tables. So I take a step back and look over to him, and I was like, counsel, can you please explain the serious domestic violence issues in the case? And he immediately changed the subject. But he said in front of that judge probably 20 times in the last 3 hearings, we have a serious domestic violence issue. No, we had 2 parents who couldn't communicate, and by the letter of the law, the judge found that the man had crossed the line. There's no coercive control, there's no physical violence, there's no threats of any violence. It was the judge found that this individual had crossed the line like 2 years ago in terms of his communication. But when the truth is put in front of them, they start yelling other things. So it's like I said, it's a way that they keep their clients happy. It's a way they run their bill up, and it's a way they attempt to control the situation.
Yeah, and the thing is, it is unethical. It should be unethical, and it should be punished. Unfortunately, it's not. And I'm not sure I know the answer as to why and how to get it to be enforced. But those ethical rules that should apply to everyone certainly don't seem to apply in family law. I'm increasingly of the thought process that we need specific ethical rules that apply to family law situations. And
hey, you and I both come from different. So I was trained labor and employment attorney, sports and fitness industry. Like I've seen. I mean, if you have a labor and employment issue, like it's pretty black and white. You're in the personal injury space, and you see how things operate, and it's very procedure based. You have to do certain things. There are definite no-goes, and then you merge into this family court space, and it just the only way you can explain it to clients is like, well, they just allow things to operate in a gray area.
Yeah, I mean, I explained it to a client today. I said, here's the dirty little secret, that judges and commissioners are worried about dead women, dead children, but they don't care about fathers who kill themselves.
Exactly. Hey, not granting a domestic violence restraining order and something happens, that judge's name ends up in the paper. If they grant it, even though it's not warranted, and the bar is extremely low in family court, they're at zero risk.
Mm-hmm.
They're at they can't gain anything by not granting it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. And they have a lot to lose, if they get it wrong. So they're just, incredibly conservative on doing that. But also, we talked about this problem before, which is, unfortunately, domestic violence is defined just way, way, way too broadly. And there's this cultural belief that's just wrong. I mean, that's two things. We're going to talk about two things right there. So, one is that domestic violence is defined so broadly. So in Washington State, domestic violence can be the infliction of fear of violence on the other person. Well, it's supposed to be the infliction, it's supposed to be measured on a reasonable fear basis. And that comes from a case called Marriage of Freeman, which adopted a test from New Jersey called Marriage of Carfagia. So, that's supposed to be what it's supposed to happen. The court's supposed to go, okay, you're claiming that you're afraid. Now we're going to look at the facts and we're going to see whether or not that's a reasonable fear or not. And if it's not a reasonable fear, then we're not going to call it domestic violence. We're going to call it, put your big boy, shorts on, put your big girl shorts on, right? And be an adult. Okay. But they don't do that. Instead, what they actually do is they just say, oh, it's the infliction of fear. Okay. If the person subjectively says, I'm afraid, then they sort of knee-jerk just say, that they're going to go ahead and, issue, a DVPO. And then here's another really dirty secret, which is, and no one wants to talk about this. There's a public perception in the world and in the United States that men are domestic violence abusers and women are innocent victims. Well, the statistics actually tell a very different story. You are far more likely to die in a mother-led household if you're a child than you are to die at the hands of your father.
There's studies that look at four parties in child abuse cases, and specifically, there's a few studies in children that have died. And of the four people, they look at mom, they look at dad, they look at mom's new partner and dad's new partner. Statistically, the person most likely to harm a child is mom's new partner. Number 2 is mom. Number 3 is dad, and then there's almost no instances where dad's new partner is the one who is the perpetrator of child abuse.
Right. So I mean that's and those numbers come undoubtedly from the Census Department and from the Department of Justice's Bureau of Statistics, and but try talking about that to the domestic violence industry. Try talking to the domestic violence industry about the fact that roughly 40% of all domestic violence victims are men, right? Try talking about that. Men stand a greater chance of suffering physical violence at the hand of their female partners than women do of suffering physical violence at the hand of their male partners. Try telling that to the domestic violence industry. Now, those are facts backed up by data, but the public perception is the direct opposite. So that implies why? Why is the public perception the direct opposite of what the facts and the data show? And the simple answer to that is $60 billion a year.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's study after study shows that anywhere between, and there's a wide range, but studies show anywhere from, there's a Harvard study that says 70% of the victims of domestic violence are men. But you see anywhere between 40 and 70% of victims are men. Studied, if you look study by study at over the past probably 30 years. So, I mean, it's a serious issue. Then there's also a study out there that says that men are victims of physical domestic violence 15 times before they report, which is obviously problematic. And on the flip side, women are victims 6 or 7 times before they report, right, which is problematic in itself, but that means that men are victims of physical domestic violence if those statistics hold across a broad spectrum twice as frequently as women before it comes to light.
Right. And some of these things you can even just see sort of just expressed in popular culture. So for instance, men seem to have really gotten the message over the last 40, 50 years that it is not cool to hit your wife and your girlfriend. Okay. That, if you think of like, the old movies, right? It used to be a fairly, a fairly common sort of movie line where, woman would be acting hysterical and the man would slap her across the face and, suddenly she was snapped out of it, right? You don't see that anymore, right? You just don't. In our popular culture, you don't see that. Aside from like some of the hyper violent, movies that we see in which the violence is just cuts across board, like some of these superhero movies, right, where the violence is everywhere. Okay, but if you're talking about, you're like just the culture itself, right? How common is it now for us to still see, in our cinema, that women are inflicting physical violence on men? Extraordinarily common, right?
We just got a comment that we just got a comment that actually is very interesting on that point. And I would be interested to study this more. So Daniel says, what really shows the difference in rates of physical domestic violence between lesbians is very high. Cases of physical domestic violence between gay men is very low. Now, I don't know any statistics or anything, but if this was factually true, that would point to a lot of questions that need to be answered in terms of how we view domestic violence.
True, but and again, I have no idea whether that's true or not. I don't know anything about that. But if that were true, that would also sort of dovetail to sort of the point that I'm kind of making here, which is that men seem to have really gotten the message that inflicting physical violence on your partner is not acceptable, whereas our culture still has an enormous and long way to go, in terms of recognizing that women haven't gotten that message, and that women inflict violence on their male partners all the time, and it's a problem that needs to be addressed with the same level of seriousness as we addressed male on female violence over the last 40 or 50 years. But
yeah,
we don't do that, and I don't think that we're going to do that, because there's a 60 or 70 billion dollar industry that has built up behind this idea of domestic violence being this horrible, endemic, out of control problem that we need to pour billions and billions and billions of dollars into every year, without end.
Yeah.
I know we talked about this before. About how the DOJ has been tracking, the Census Bureau and the DOJ has been tracking domestic violence since the 50s. So if you go back and you think that in the 50s, when say domestic violence was being really explored as a problem that needed to really be addressed and be treated as a problem, as a social problem that was unacceptable. And you talk to sort of the average man and say, is it acceptable to, hit your wife and your girlfriend? And they'd be like, no, that's not acceptable. And we're going to say, well, we got a name for that. That's called domestic violence. And we're going to make that illegal. We're going to put an enormous amount of effort and energy into stamping that problem out. I think probably your average decent man would be like, yeah, that's a great idea. That's a wonderful idea. Okay. If you ask that same man, right, and I'm just using him as a stand-in for probably the slice of our society back then. Well, do we think that we're going to apply those same levels of standards to the idea that if you yell at your wife, that's domestic violence, and you should lose access to your children, and it should cost you, enormous amounts of money to do that? I think they would probably scratch their head and go, "What the hell are you talking about?" Right? Are we gonna say, well, you know what? If you tell your wife, what, I don't want you hanging around with those, a bunch of other women who are divorced, and the only thing they do is get together and drink and say bad things about their ex-husbands, and they say it in front of their kids. And you say to them, I don't think they're a really good influence for you or for our children, that we're going to call that coercive control, and we're going to say that that's domestic violence. We're going to, do the same thing to you as if you beat your wife. I think they would all be going like, what are you talking about? But that's the world we live in now.
Yeah, 100% agree. And we've covered a pretty broad spectrum tonight. I know we talked a lot about domestic violence. But Sean, as we wrap up here, they can find you. So you have unethical.karma.com is your website. And once again, want to thank you for coming in, providing your perspective. And I'm sure we will do it again soon. For everyone else, I will see you guys next Thursday. Have a great night.